when there is no more room in hell.
Well, sometimes that is better.
The dead will walk the earth.
Hey guys. All right. Welcome to episode 5, Shambling Horror Podcast. Sorry I haven't put up an episode in like a week or two. I've been out of town doing stuff, had COVID, all kind of life nonsense. Yeah, guys, welcome back. So today, we'll do a little bit of a short episode. We're going to do one on Resident Evil, and it's going to be Resident Evil, but like, I'm not going to cover like the novels or like the weird spin-off games or like the movie stuff. Like Resident Evil lore and the timeline is almost worse than Zelda's, but not quite. It's really kind of nutty. But yeah, we'll cover that. We're going to do the mainline games. And I'm sure some of you guys will hit me up in comments and be like, well, but what about this one? Well, what about that one? Right? Like, please. All right. So, a game that I actually don't think gets as much love as it probably should, that technically starts the series, is Resident Evil 0. So, Resident Evil 0 is probably like the most, I think it's probably like the most claustrophobic out of all of the, no pun intended. I think it's probably the most claustrophobic out of all of the games in the series. It takes place on a train with Rebecca Chambers and a character named Billy Cohen, who you literally never see. I don't think he ever shows back up in the series again. It's not a spoiler, but like, he's actually really a really interesting character, and you never see him again. He just disappears off the face of the earth. It's really weird. I don't even know if I'm trying to remember if he even comes back in the novels at all. Yeah, it's super, super, super weird, man. Hey, what up, Superfly, dude? I'm doing good, man. We just started the podcast. All right, so Resident Evil 0, takes place on a train. Basically, what happens is, this train, like, it goes south. Some things start happening on the train and in the Arklay Mountains, and before the events of Resident Evil 1, Rebecca Chambers goes with a team, and they start investigating why this train stalled out. And so what happens is you find out that Dr. Marcus, who was one of the original, makers, like he worked with Umbrella, working on like the T-virus and the projector virus and like all of the nonsense that you end up getting with, like, what was it? Like Spencer, was it Spencer and Marcus and who was Alexa's parents? Alexa and Alexis. I can't remember. But like all the old heads who ended up like founding Umbrella with all this virus research. He was one of them. And he ends up finding this virus and messing around with it and ends up making the leech monsters that you'll see later. We won't talk about them tonight. But those leech monsters end up coming into play. Technically, it's Resident Evil Outbreak, although I've done some research into this, and a lot of people say those leech monsters aren't technically the same leech monsters, but like they are. Come on, bro. Like, but yeah, there's like leech monsters that like leech onto dudes and make them all like, blah, 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 and they get like all infected, and it's all creepy, and it's on a train. Resident Evil 0 is really neat, at least for the storylines of the games. And there's like this big old fight on the train. And basically Rebecca and Billy, escape. They escape. Billy just sort of wanders off into the universe. We don't know where he goes. It's super weird. So, but then you get the game that everybody remembers, which is Resident Evil 1. So Resident Evil 0, and then technically was the prequel to the events of Resident Evil 1. So the events of Resident Evil 1, most of you guys are familiar with. Basically, there's a there's a whole bunch of disappearances and weird shit in the Arklay Mountains, and surrounding the Spencer Mansion. And I want to say, if I remember right, they even there's some shit going on in the background, where like they lose contact with the facility that was at the Spencer Mansion that no one technically was supposed to know about. And there's some like subterfuge there with Wesker and some other shit. Well, they go and immediately get attacked Well, they send a first team that doesn't report back. This was in the movie. Welcome to Raccoon City. Oh, that's not a spoiler. But they send a second team, and the second team is, what is it? Jill, Wesker, Chris, Barry. Is it Jill, Wesker, Chris, Barry, and there was another dude. What the hell was the other guy's name? Like Steve, or whatever his name was. The guy that got bit by the snake. I can't remember. But like, they go in this mansion, and it's crazy. It's like a death trap. There's like snakes, and what is her name? Lisa Trevor is like, blah, she's all like creepy. She has like things on her head. And they go through this mansion and they end up they get attacked and they flee into the mansion in the beginning. And then you find that there's like a research lab like under the mansion, and there's like all this like crazy shit going on, and like Lisa Trevor was like being experimented on by Umbrella with all this like virus technology and all this nuts like shit. And basically what happens at the end is the mansion blows up. Wesker gets infected. They think he dies. Barry lives. Jill lives. Chris lives. The other guy dies. And that's kind of where we're at with that. And then what happens is, as that's going on, you go basically into your Resident Evil 2 stuff. Like, Resident Evil 1 takes place technically before Resident Evil 2, but they sort of overlap a little bit, if that makes sense. It's all like before Resident Evil 2, but it overlaps a bit. So, because all of those characters are still missing. Like, they haven't made it back to town yet when Resident Evil 2 happens. Like, if that makes sense. Technically Jill and Barry are technically, I think, back in town because Resident Evil 3 sort of overlaps a bit. But that's kind of where we're at. So then we get to Resident Evil 2, right? And Resident Evil 2 is two characters you have not met yet. It's Leon and Claire, who are the other characters in the movie that we were talking about earlier. Welcome to Raccoon City. So what happens is you end up at this place where, like, Leon is a rookie cop in Raccoon City. Raccoon City neighbors the Arclay Mountains and the Spencer Mansion. And Umbrella has a big, like, headquarters there. Like, does that make sense? Like, so they were doing all their research outside of town, and, like, funding it and doing it all outside of town, sort of, which we'll get to. So what happens is, Leon works at the Raccoon City Police Department, and Claire is the sister of Chris, who deployed to the Arclay Mountains to Spencer Mansion in the first one, and he's missing. They don't know where he is. So she's looking for him, shows up town looking for him, like, looking for my brother, don't know where the hell he is, right? So there's like this crazy confluence of events where Leon and Claire meet up, right? Leon and Claire end up meeting. Zombies essentially, it's a bit of both, actually. It's a bit of like zombies escaping like and through like the Arclay Mountains, like into Raccoon City. But then there's also an event where like something happens in Raccoon City where Umbrella decides they're not fucking around anymore, and they try and take their virus back from the people that were working on it for them. And that goes south, and that infects some rats. That basically infect this city. There's like a little bit of both, because there's a trucker that gets bit, but he's like out in the middle of nowhere, so that wouldn't make any sense. So that, yeah, there's like a little bit of both there. But basically what happens is Leon and Claire end up in Raccoon City that's like being overrun by zombies. Basically, like, as they're getting there. And so they end up at this police station. They like flee to the police station, and the police station's overrun. So in the game and the timeline, basically, you're investigating, like, you're trying to like survive, and you're trying to like figure out what's going on, and you find out that the police chief is corrupt. The police chief Irons is corrupt, and Umbrella basically has him in their pocket, right? And they fight all these creatures at the police station and end up like fleeing a bioweapon that Umbrella drops. And you end up under the city, and you work your way through the sewer into a secret facility that Umbrella had under Raccoon City where they were doing more research. And you find, was it Sherry Birkin, who's the daughter of like the head researcher down there. He was the one that Umbrella killed to try and steal their research bag. Basically, he was working for them and he was like, no, this is my research. And they kill him. And he turns into like a big monster and shit. And he's like the big bad, one of the big bad bosses in the end of the game. But what happens is Claire, Leon, Sherry, and another character named Ada Wong, who they introduced in Resident Evil 2, who's like a spy like lady. They all end up underground in this facility, trying to stop Umbrella, and trying to like stop this outbreak. So yeah, so they basically blow up the facility and they all escape out into out of Raccoon City, sort of towards Arclay Mountains. It's like weird. And all of those characters, Leon, Claire, Chris, and Ada, won't necessarily come back together for like a while in the timeline. They kind of go off and do their thing. So then what we do is we have Resident Evil 3, which is weird. It's like technically like a prequel to Resident Evil 2. It's they sort of take place at the same time. And what's actually interesting is Resident Evil 2, the game, the remake, if you go back and play that, you can actually hear they patched in the villain, one of the bosses from Resident Evil 3, like on the outside of the police station. So like if you go back and play Resident Evil 2, there's one of those hallways. If you walk down it and you just sort of stand for a while, you can hear him yelling, "Stars!" Like on the outside of the building. That's the dude from Resident Evil 3. They coded that in after they like announced Resident Evil 3 remake was coming out and all of that. They coded it into the game. It's actually terrifying. You can hear him stomping around. You never see him, but you can hear him. So Resident Evil 3 was Barry and Jill from Resident Evil 1, right? It was Barry and Jill from Resident Evil 1, and a couple other characters, Carlos and a couple other characters are in the city when the virus actually like goes down, like in the beginning. They get back to the city from all the nonsense that happened in Resident Evil 1, just in time basically for the city to go to hell. And so what happens is Umbrella deploys a force to try and like cover up the evidence basically. And the whole story of Resident Evil 3 is them fleeing a bioweapon called Nemesis, the Nemesis Project. It's this big like creepy dude. That's the one I was telling you guys about. That's the story, is basically them fleeing through the city, trying to escape the city. And they're sort of uncovering all this evidence that Umbrella was like dicking around and doing some shit they shouldn't have with that virus. And that wraps up with the city getting nuked. It gets nuked like it did at the end of Resident Evil 2. Those sort of overlap. And Jill and Barry escaped the city. And technically, I think Carlos got out too, if I remember right. It's been a while. But those three get out of the city, and the city just gets demolished. And then what's interesting in this Resident Evil timeline, and I'll scroll down here. I have this up just for sort of reference. I've played all these games, but so what's interesting is then you get Code Veronica and Rockford Island. So Code Veronica Rockford Island is not, so technically it's Resident Evil 4, which bothers me. It's the fourth game. But they just decided, I guess, to mess around with the names or whatever. So what you end up with is Claire from the second game, right, who was Chris's sister, goes and looks for Chris. And and I really hope they remake this game at some point. They might actually be remaking this game. Nobody knows. It's like a rumor. But basically, Claire, like from the movie and from the second game, ends up going and looking for her brother Chris. And she gets some like news that he's locked in a like a prison facility, sorta, on an island in Rockford Island. So she goes to find him. Ends up getting her helicopter like destroyed in the beginning. And ends up waking up like in a prison cell on Rockford Island. And there's an outbreak of the virus on Rockford Island. And so she starts freaking out. She's like, yo, this is crazy. I just like left Raccoon, like same thing happened. So she's like, all right, this is some bullshit. So find out that one of the founders of Umbrella had his residence on the island and was doing private experiments on his, again, essentially it was his grandkids. His kids or his grandkids. And that was actually referenced in, Welcome to Raccoon City. That's not a spoiler, the movie. So she ends up like, fighting like, it's like a Wesker variant. He's all crazy looking. He comes back. He comes back. I should have mentioned that. They mention him in Resident Evil 2 and Resident Evil 3. He's mentioned, Wesker. Like, he's alive. He made it out of the city. So they basically, like, she goes through the island and she fights all these creatures and shit, gets to the mansion on the island, finds out that Alexa and Alexis are the, like, genetically modified, like, I think they're grandkids of one of the founders. I cannot remember his last name. What was his last name? Not Steve Burnside. Oh, the Ashfords. Yes, it was Ashford. So it was the Ashford Twins. They're like genetically modified and they're like all creepy and like he did all these experiments on them. And basically what happens is you fight them, but then Chris shows up at the island looking for her. And you end up in a situation where like they fight that creature at the end. Like Wesker shows up, although Wesker's like, he's like different. I don't know. Wesker's like changed. He's like infected. Although I want to say, if I remember right, it was actually like, it was like a different version of Wesker. But they basically blow up the island, destroy all those secrets, all that evidence gets covered up. So then you end up on this weird spinoff with Resident Evil 4, where hopefully everybody's tracking. So you end up on this weird spinoff with Resident Evil 4, where Leon gets reintroduced after all the bullshit he went through in Resident Evil 2, and he was tasked by the president to find the president's daughter. And so he ends up in I can't remember, it was in Spain, but I can't remember the name of the village. But he ends up going looking for her. Turns out she was kidnapped by like this cult. And the cult is like secretly like has ties to Umbrella, and they're doing more research. And it's the the Las Plagas virus. And the Las Plagas virus is different because it's actually like not like necessarily like a blood virus you inject. It's actually like a parasite. And it essentially takes you over and they control you. Like you become like this like zombie person, but like not really. It's like this shit they inject in your body. It's a parasite that they can control you with. And so Umbrella and this cult, this like super old cult, are using this town to basically do experiments on the like members of the town. And they just have like this big giant cult, and it's like super creepy and gothic. This is the other game that like everyone's supposed, like this is being remade, Resident Evil 4. But basically what happens is Leon rescues the daughter, and they fight all these like culty shitheads. And I want to say, it's not Wesker, but I want to say, I thought he showed up at some point, but I don't remember. But basically they're using his daughter as like leverage. The president's daughter is leverage. And he fights all these creatures. And Ada Wong shows back up at some point, like tries to steal the sample like she always does. And that's where we're at Resident Evil 4. Leon saves the day. But the Las Plagas thing sets up the stuff for Resident Evil 5. So Resident Evil 5 is Chris, very similar as the stuff with Leon. He goes off on his own, working for another organization that is investigating Umbrella. And him and Shiva basically go to, I remember where in Africa they were, but they go to a village in Africa that has people that have been infected by this Las Plagas shit for Resident Evil 4. And what happens is you find out that like, that's where you run back into Wesker. And that's where you figure out that like the ties between Las Plagas, right? The ties between Las Plagas and Umbrella like are finally like revealed. You know what's funny is, like I said, I want to say he was in Resident Evil 4, like very briefly. Like you heard him on the phone, or like he showed up in a cutscene. Although I haven't played it in like 20 years. I haven't played a game in a long time. But you end up, and then it was like this Tricell. I think they introduced Tricell, but you end up in like this village, and all these people are going nuts. It's like a mutated version of Las Plagas that like actually makes you like a monster, like a crazy like monster, right? And you have to fight through all that, and then like you end up with like mutated like creatures and all this like crazy shit. And you fight through all that, and it was the Ouroboros virus. They call it the Ouroboros virus. It's like a mutated version of Las Plagas. And what happens is you end up like literally throwing Wesker into a volcano at the end. It's the craziest shit ever. But yeah, you throw Wesker, like literally throw his mutated body into a volcano, and you shoot him with a rocket or some shit, and like flies into a volcano. It's like, it's outrageous. So he dies. Wesker, I don't think has ever come back. Ever. Like they literally throw him in a volcano. His son comes back in the next game, but Wesker is like dead. Like at that point, he's dead. As far as the timeline goes, not any of this prequel shit, but like with the timeline and shit, like he's gone. He's not coming back. Well, not yet. I don't know. You know how they do it. Then you had Resident Evil 6. So Resident Evil 6 is probably like my least favorite. It's a lot of people's least favorite. It's not very good. 5 wasn't very great either. 6 was nuts. 6 was like all of the people, like all of the characters. It was ridiculous. It was it Leon, Chris, Jake Wesker, who's Homeboy's son, Albert Wesker's son, Ada. There's like a ton of other characters too. Sherry was in it. Sherry's like an adult. I think the chick from Resident Evil 4, the daughter was in it. The president's daughter. There's like tons and tons and tons of characters in this game. It's really kind of hard to follow. There's like all these different storylines. But how do I even describe Resident Evil 6, man? There's so much going on in that game. There's way too much going on in that game. You have like Leon with his own story, and like Chris with his own story, and Jake and Sherry with their own story. Like, it is nuts. But it basically all culminates with, I want to say, like Tricell and like Umbrella, and all of it like basically collapses. I don't really know how other way to describe it. Like, there's just a lot that goes on in Resident Evil 6. They're like, I didn't really like that game. But that's kind of the end. Like, it sort of wraps the series up in a ball. Resident Evil 6. As far as storylines go, they all sort of come together at the end. And then you end up with probably one of the best games in the series. You end up with Resident Evil 7. So Resident Evil 7, I don't really know where this falls in the timeline. I don't really know where this falls in the timeline. Resident Evil 7, like as far as like the games, it's like weird. Because what happens is you end up with, there's like a journalist, like an investigator named Ethan Winters who gets a communication from his girlfriend. She disappears and he gets communication from his girlfriend like, hey, I need help. So he goes on location in Louisiana and this farmhouse, or not farmhouse, like this house to try and find her, and ends up being basically kidnapped and abducted and held hostage by this family who are like cannibals and they're nuts. And you find out that there was like a cruise ship that like wrecked on the beach. And there's like this mold like that I hesitate to say Umbrella, but I want to say it was Umbrella. It was Umbrella, actually. I know it was Umbrella, and I'll tell you why. So Umbrella was doing some research with this mold, and the research ship that they were doing that research with crashes near where this farmhouse is. And that family ends up getting infected. And like, then they start like taking hostages and like doing their own experiments. and like making them members of their family, and you end up like mold people in the basement and all this like crazy shit. Well, your character in Resident Evil 7 works his way through all this shit and has to fight the family while he's like trying to rescue his girlfriend. And then you find out that she has essentially taken on the consciousness of the creature. The mold has like a consciousness, and you end up finding out like her character ends up taking on the consciousness of that like creature. It's like nuts. So what happens in the end is you kill that family, and you Ethan Winters and Mia like escape. That's sort of like they wrap it all up. They like destroy the ship, and they escape. And so then we get the last game they came out with, was Resident Evil Village. The reason I say I don't really know where this falls in the timeline is because Chris shows up at the end of Resident Evil Village or Resident Evil 7 as like DLC. So I don't really know where Resident Evil 7 falls in the timeline. It's somewhere. It's not a prequel. I honestly thought it was, but it's not. It's sort of, I want to say it might be like the most modern one actually, because Chris shows up. And the reason I say it might be the most modern one is because he's older when he shows up in 7. And then Resident Evil 8 happens. So Resident Evil 8 is a direct sequel to Resident Evil 7. And what happens is you have Ethan and Mia from Resident Evil 7 living their life like normal. They have a kid. And, Chris shows up in the beginning and kills Mia. This is a bit of a spoiler, but Chris shows up in the beginning and kills Mia and takes the kid and takes off. And takes you into custody. And then you wake up and your shit, the vehicle they had you in is crashed, and you end up in this village in like can't remember where. Did they ever say where it was? It was Europe somewhere. And you have to work your way through this village that's been overrun by a group. Was it 4 or 5 of like these crazy characters, like a giant vampire lady who lives in a mansion and a dude that's like made out of metal. And they have a cult and a church. It's kind of like Resident Evil 4, but it's a lot better. And what happens is they have essentially dominated and turned all the residents of the village into like vampires and like, or not vampires, like werewolves and shit. And like, they're using them to like do all this research and shit. And you find out that, they essentially have been funded by Umbrella, roundabouts. I don't remember, I haven't played it in a while, but I don't remember specifically like how Umbrella tied in, but you find all this like Umbrella iconography and like all this like crazy shit all over the village. And you find out that the mold, so the lady that runs the town is trying to, like use the baby to like ascend somehow. Like I want to say the baby had like the consciousness of the mold and she was like trying to merge with that. And towards the end of the game, Chris shows up. That's why I say that it's I think it's the most modern in the timeline because Chris shows up and he's like older. And then when the game wraps up, like you kill the creature and you actually, and this is a spoiler, this is a spoiler. I'm telling you, this is a spoiler for Resident Evil Village. I'm giving you a spoiler warning. I'm about to tell you how the game wraps up. I'm giving you a spoiler warning. All right, we're good? Okay. So you find out that Ethan died. Ethan actually died in Resident Evil 7, and the mold brought him back to life. Because the mold, yeah, I know, it's crazy, because the mold essentially was Mia, right? Yeah, so the mold brings him back to life that he's actually dead the entire time you're playing Resident Evil 7 and Resident Evil 8. He's dead. And what happens in the end is they destroy the mold in the end of Resident Evil Village, and they help his daughter. They help his daughter escape. The baby Chris helps his daughter escape, but because of that, he dies, and that's how it ends. And so his daughter escapes, although his daughter is the direct descendant of Mia. So like, yeah, so like there's some shit going on there. Because at the end of the game, his daughter is older. So like, that's what I mean. I think it's the most modern one because you have like Chris, well, they don't technically show Chris older, but like she's older. She's like in her like late teens in the end of the game, and they're driving off, and you see a character walking in the distance, and they've actually confirmed that was Ethan. So like that consciousness technically is still there from the mold. Like she's embodied that. And that's kind of where we leave off with the games. So yeah, if anybody has any questions, that's the basic timeline of the mainline like story games in the timeline of Resident Evil. I know there's some stuff I brushed over. I only do this podcast like an hour a week. I could talk for like 4 hours about the full crazy, like all the game timeline and all the spinoffs and everything of Resident Evil. But like, that's your basic timeline. There are some characters we don't necessarily get to see in the main story again, like Rebecca Chambers. I don't think ever comes back. You get to see Jill a few times. You get to see Chris and Leon and Claire a few times. Barry comes back a few times, but yeah, Rebecca Chambers is like the one character. Rebecca Chambers is like the one character who kind of trying to remember. I don't think she ever comes back. But yeah, that'll do it for us. Thank you guys so much for tuning in to shit. You know what we gotta do? We always do this. We do like upcoming news and shit. I am sorry that I almost didn't do that. We do current events for like survival horror stuff. I just we'll look a few things up and like if there's anything going on. Like obviously like last week we went over All of Us Are Dead on Netflix. Like if stuff's coming out, we'll go over that. Most of this is like game stuff. I want to cover some of this. So this is actually I don't actually think this looks that interesting, although we are getting a VR. It's essentially like a survival horror game, like Outlast or whatever, but like you're like in a wheelchair. I don't know. Like the trailer looks cool. I just don't think this idea is that interesting. I mean, it would be terrifying, right? To be like stuck in a wheelchair. Like during like a goddamn like zombie apocalypse, right? Like, but I will tell you though, there is a book, and I can't remember. I read it years ago, or maybe it was a short story where it was a dude an old man who was in the city when a zombie apocalypse started, like in the nursing home, and he escapes the city with his walker, and it is the fucking best. And I want to say he meets up with like a blind samurai or some shit. It's like the most outrageous shit ever. That he is literally fighting his way out of the city with his walker. It is fucking fantastic. And I cannot remember who wrote that story. I want to say it was a short story. It was in like one of those like compendiums or whatever they have. Like the collection of like zombie stories that they'll do. You can find all the time. But yeah, if you guys can find that, it's really good. But yeah, like the whole like, this whole like, I'm trapped in a wheelchair, there's like creatures attacking me thing. Like, I don't know. It just doesn't sound that interesting to me. But it's called Deadness. It is available now, I think. I think you can get it now. It's on VR. I don't know which VR. I don't own a VR. But it looks cool. Like the trailer looks all right. This next one looks interesting. So I have not actually seen any gameplay from this. It's this weird... It almost looks like, I don't know if the next one's called this is all like current event stuff. There's a game coming out called On Air. And it looks kind of like I don't know if you guys ever played was it Moons of Saturn? I think it was called Moons of Saturn, or not Rings of Saturn, that's a band. Or Moons of Madness. No, I think it was called Moons of Madness. There's a game called Moons of Madness that came out a couple years ago. The trailer to this makes this look a lot like Moons of Madness. That game was actually really cool. It was a really like a true survival horror, like where you don't really have a lot of weapons, you just gotta haul ass. That game's a lot of fun. It goes south too. It goes crazy. We're like hallucinating and like seeing all this like crazy like cosmic horror stuff. This game looks a lot like that. It's called On Air. I don't think there's a release date for this yet, but there's been some like media for it coming out. Highly recommend you guys check that out. Yeah, it's a sci-fi survival horror On Air. These last two that I want to go over, I actually am very, very, very excited for. There's one of these games that's called Expedition Zero, and it looks awesome. It looks really, really, really cool. It comes out, there's a demo for it out now, which I might play on Sunday on the stream, on our live stream on Twitch. I'm probably actually going to play it on Sunday. I'm going to download to play it on Sunday, and it comes out, I think, March 24th on the Steam, Epic Game Store, and GOG. I'm going to see if I can get it on console. If I can get it on console, I'll play it on there. This looks awesome. This kind of reminds me of The Thing. And in the actual trailer of this, there's like creepy shit, like where like creatures will climb up trees and shit that surround the forest of where you are, and you have to like shoot them down, and there's all this like, it looks really, really, really good. Visually, it looks amazing. There's like dudes stuck under doors in a trailer and all kind of like creepy ass shit. I get a real Thing vibe out of this. I get a real vibe of like The Thing. Because it takes place in like rural Siberia and it's all like snowy and weird. Highly recommend this game. I'll be playing this on Sunday on the stream if I can get a hold of the demo. Comes out March 24th, Expedition Zero. And the last kind of thing as far as current events that I wanted to go over was this. This also looks really interesting. So I think the guys from Residents of Evil have played this. I don't know. I need to see if I can get my hands on this demo. It's called Perished Truth. I don't know who, it's Devoid Studio. I don't know what else they developed. But basically, it's 10 people trapped in a warehouse. They're kidnapped to wake up in a warehouse, and there's all this like zombie shit going on, and they have to survive. The thing that's interesting about this is they do it in the style, like it's like tank control, like your typical like survival horror Resident Evil or Silent Hill game, but it's narrated in, what do they call that? Like not story, it's visual novel. Almost like your, what is it? Your Doki Doki High School, whatever that game is called, where it's like, it's narrated by characters that are, drawn in and animated like a visual novel style. Almost like your anime, like visual novels, on top of the actual visuals of this game. Like the character will come up and they do that thing with the visual novel where they cross their arms and like you get the text and then they like animate and then you get the text. It looks really, really neat. When this game comes out, we'll definitely stream this on my stream. It is called Perished Truth. It is a visual novel that's overlaid on top of like a traditional like survival horror game. It looks really, really interesting. I actually need to jump in the Discord for these guys, but I'll list all this in the description of the podcast, all these games if you want to check them out. But that will wrap it up for us for episode 5. Thank you guys for joining us. Don't forget, you guys can catch us in the Twitch channel, Garish Zod on Twitch, all one word. Same thing on YouTube, Garish Zod. You can find me over there. We do tons of playthroughs on my YouTube, and I post some of my live stream content over there. But yeah, that'll do it for us, guys. Episode 6 will be next Friday. Kind of want to get a guest on. I'm working on something. But yeah, I will catch all you guys in the next one, guys. Bye. Bye.